and to have the humility to embrace your spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
uh, while not making that blanket declaration that every other person away from your belief system is hellbound, it's
Wow.
completely hellbound. Yeah, it's so critical for that to happen because we cannot also, as Africans, then allow the fact that I am a Christian and you're a Muslim, or I am a Muslim and you're a Christian, to then viscerally and fundamentally divide us. So much so that uh, you, as a Christian, you associate more with the United States of America. Me, as a Muslim, I associate much more with the Gulf states. You
Wow.
know,
Wow.
yeah, that cannot happen.
Living a dream, living the African dream.
Hello, or welcome to the Pan African Hub. This is the Pan African Lifestyle Show, and I'm your host, Harrison Paul. Today, we are honored to host an esteemed thinker, leader, and writer, Pan Africanist DJ Bwakali. Through his insightful commentary and inspiring work, DJ has become the leading voice advocating for economic, political, and social reform across the continent. Brothers and sisters, pals, this was such a moving conversation, and I know you guys are going to be just as moved and as touched as I was having it. Enjoy. DJ Bwakali, how are you, sir? What
Oh,
a pleasure it is to have you on the Pan African Lifestyle Show.
I'm doing great, my brother Harrison. It is also a pleasure for me to be here.
I was just saying, I think I had to hold myself from screaming when we were offline because I was like, this right here is a African leader in your own rights, definitely an African leader. And our home pal and even my family home is a huge fan of you. So it's such a pleasure to have you on. And where are you live from? Where are you streaming live from today?
I think, yeah, I'm from Nairobi, streaming live from Nairobi, Kenya's
Okay.
capital. And
Okay.
I always say that I'm an African currently based in Kenya, but
Mm-hmm.
Africa is home, man.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
Wonderful stuff. And for anybody who's watching who's going to be getting to know you for the first time, I wanted to read you out your brief. I also love reading it for the guests because I like to remind them all the great things they've done so they can kind of have a little flashback as they start this moment. And so I just say
Yes.
David John Bwakali is a Kenyan author, social commentator, and a Pan-Africanist known for his thought-provoking messages aimed at bettering the continent. His work focuses on economic, political, and business reform, critical thinking, and uniting Africans globally and on the continent. He is the author of Savannah Footprints, Wisdom Whispers from Historic African Leaders. How does that feel when you hear that, sir?
Real good, because a lot of times it's easy to lose touch with what you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to hear it.
You know,
Yes.
I want to go on to say, your work spans from writing, commentary, and even activism. How do you see? Because that's a particular word we use there. Critical thinking as shaping the future of Africa.
Now, Harrison, I gotta say that's one of the best questions that somebody can be asked, because critical thinking is about questioning assumptions.
Mm.
And sometimes assumptions are fatal.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you're driving a car whose brakes are faulty and you assume that it's gonna be just fine,
Mm.
that is a fatal assumption that can
Mm-hmm.
easily cost you your life.
Mm.
So the fatal assumptions that are being made about Africa today
Mm.
are completely unfortunate and tragic, and we must call them out and we must address them.
Mm.
And critical thinking actually helps us to question such assumptions,
Mm.
to be extremely innovative in the way that we
Mm.
look at Pan-Africanism, in the way we
Mm.
look at what should we do to transform Africa in a manner that is not just linear thinking, or just commonplace reasoning. It's about probing things deeper. For example, one of the fatal assumptions, as a matter of fact, in the last couple of months, I've been doing an audit of fatal assumptions on the continent. And two that I can talk of now would be, you see, when you're looking at the 41 different currencies on the African continent, we have made the assumption that it's okay. That's how it has always been. So you find that if you have Zambian kwacha, that's the national currency in Zambia, it's called kwacha, and you come to Nairobi, Kenya, you cannot, that's just worthless paper. Now, if you have Kenya shillings and then you show up in Benin, West Africa, that is just worthless paper. But if you show up with US dollars in any of the 54 African countries, then that is not worthless paper.
Wow.
Then there's value in that. Now, we have made a fatal assumption that it's okay to continue using all these different currencies, but it's not okay. For example, every year, Africa loses about $5 billion because of these multiple currencies. There are at least 41 different national currencies. So because of all the exchange rates and what have you, we lose about $5 billion. And that's a conservative estimate. That's a lot of money, Harrison. That's the kind of money that would build roads and hospitals and create jobs for the amazing young people of Africa. But because we continue to assume that it's okay. So critical thinking is you sitting right there. It is any of the 1.5 billion Africans in the motherland or the 2 billion in the motherland and in the diaspora asking the question, wait a minute, why must we have all these different currencies? Like, why? You know, who bequeathed us these currencies? Must we continue to have them? And the more you question that, the more critical thinking forces you to then ask the tough questions. And when I dug deeper, I realized, Harrison, that in 1991, in Abuja, the capital of Nigeria, African heads of state adopted the Abuja Treaty. The Abuja Treaty was about economic integration of African nations, including a single African currency. Then 3 years later, in 1994, May 12th, that treaty came into force, meaning more than two-thirds of African countries voted for that treaty to come into force. However, 30 years later, 3 decades later, exactly zero has been done about that. So critical thinking would force us as Africans to then build a critical mass of awakened Africans who are saying, our leaders already passed a treaty, adopted a treaty, calling for single African currencies. It has been 30 years. Why on earth is it that we're not doing anything to ensure that that journey that began back in 94 is actually actualized? Now, Harrison, if that becomes an electoral issue across Africa, so that whether it is in Kenya in 2027 or Tanzania this year or Nigeria, I believe 2027, if I'm not wrong, if it becomes an electoral issue, then it forces the presidents of Africa and those who are seeking presidency to prioritize actualizing something that was already agreed on 30 years ago. But without critical thinking, we will just continue, you know, c'est normal, they say in French, it's normal. That it's normal for us to have all these currencies that are not helping Africa's cause at all. Yet China, with its 1.4 billion people, same number like Africa, has the yuan, a single currency. India, with its 1.4 billion people, they have the Indian rupee. The European Union, the section of the European Union that uses the euro single currency. America, with its some 350 million to 400 million people, the dollar single currency. See, so critical thinking is one of the most powerful tools in the hands and minds of Africans today, and a time has come when we must deploy such critical thinking.
Oh, you done started something today. Oh my goodness, because I'm just so excited. There's two ways I want to go. I want to ask you, but okay, the first one I want to ask is, why is it, sir? Why is it? Is it because I'm going to put it out there for people, as a lot of Africans say, are we just stupid? Someone very dear to me, I'm not going to say who, looked me in the eye when I started my Pan-Africanist journey and started, really pushing it, looked at like it was on through the phone, but obviously wanted me to stop it, and just said, "Yeah, the Bantu man is stupid. Africans are stupid," and it was just like, the white man is better than us. That's it. Don't be fighting all this stuff. And that's the other question I want to ask you. You go there after, but I'm even shocked you think like this for your age, for your generation, because your generation are the ones who really just assumed a lot of things, and that's the way the things were. I think the newer generation is the one that's, wanting to find out things, but then we'll go that direction after on a personal level, how you came to this understanding. But why is it? What's this big question mark? Why do we lack critical thinking?
Actually, we don't lack critical thinking, but a confluence of events and issues and dynamics over the last several centuries, including the pre-colonial years, a number of things have joined forces to extremely disadvantage the Africans. Let me explain that a little bit. You see, today, Africa was bequeathed a number of colonial realities that continue to disadvantage Africa, and it is going to take some time, but we can hasten that time for us to decolonize our minds. The critical thinking is there, but as long as our minds remain colonized, to assume that what was bequeathed to us is exactly how things should be, then it suppresses our critical thinking. For example, the truth of the matter is that Africa remains one of the poorest regions in the world, economically speaking. However, this is where the decolonizing of the mind comes in. You see, to the extent that the dollar is the unofficial reserve currency of the world, to the extent that Africa then has to pay its debts through the dollar or any foreign currency, it means that every single year Africa loses millions and millions of dollars just to pay its debts. So as long as that system remains like that, as long as the global economic order is still dominated by foreign currencies, most of the dollar right here in Africa, then even if we have the best of presidents who are the best critical thinkers, who are working alongside a team of amazing critical thinkers, all that good work that they will do and attempt to awaken Africans will still be undermined by this global economic order that at the moment is totally fine-tuned. Inherently within it, it cannot allow the African economic and monetary system to actually flourish, which is why I began by talking about the need for that single African currency, because it would then ensure that the Africans are not disadvantaged by the US dollar, economically speaking. Now, it is a little bit challenging to have to address the issue of a single currency when these presidents in their own countries have to grapple with basic issues of food, shelter, and water. You know, you and I at this moment can talk about critical thinking because there are no bombs that are falling on our respective shelters at this moment. If there were bombs falling on your shelter right now and on my shelter right now, there is no way we would be having this conversation of critical thinking. And then at an individual level, there is no way we would be spending the time required to have the critical thinking that will usher in a single African currency or decolonize our political systems, because even our very political systems of governance are a copy and paste of the Western form of democracy, which is a whole other topic. So the issue is that we have got to be able to address our basic needs as a simple foundational issue that then gives us a conducive environment to deploy our critical thinking to solve the continent's problem. So it is so important at that juncture for people to then remember that those who have put in place a global economic order that is inherently opposed to a flourishing African economic order are themselves contributing immense amounts towards keeping the African in this current state. So the problem would not be the lack of critical thinking in the African, but it would be in the presence of this global economic order, global political order that is already a continuation, not just of the colonization, but also of the slavery. Because all the way, Harrison, from the 1500s, when the Portuguese first came and then slavery started in the west coast of Africa, all the way from that period until now, there has been an utter and absolute exploitation of Africa's human resources, mineral resources, natural resources. So we have to then realize that that was a genesis of putting us in a situation where we have to perennially address our basic needs to the detriment of us deploying our critical thinking, number one. And then number two, I also concede that away from that colonization and neo-colonization and slavery, away from that, we also have what I call the CRE, the corrupt ruling elite right here in Africa, who then perpetuate that exploitation. But a lot of times the West, especially, likes to point only at that corrupt ruling elite as the source of Africa's problems.
Come on,
However, however, Harrison, when you are looking at somebody like Patrice Lumumba, and you're seeing Patrice Lumumba, duly elected leader of Africa, taken down, assassinated through the unholy alliance of the United States of America, Belgium, combining with the corrupt ruling elite in Congo at the time. Lumumba would never have been taken out purely by the Mobutu Sese Seko and company. He was only taken out because America and Belgium combined forces. So when they did that to Lumumba, before Lumumba, when King Leopold showed up and claimed Congo as his own private property, that was the genesis of what we're seeing in Congo today. So the easy option is to point at the Congolese people and say, hey, why do you people allow the Chinese to steal your resources? Why do you allow the Americans to steal your resources? But the truth of the matter, Harrison, is that they are grossly disadvantaged because we're talking about nearly 200 years of Western exploitation that has now been joined by Eastern exploitation. And when Lumumba rose up trying to address that, they took him down. So we have to always point at those underlying global factors that keep us in this state of perennially having to address our basic needs.
Oh my God. We gotta clip that and play it 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 again. This sentiment exactly. I asked that question in the face of the way, because I'm realizing how harsh it came out in the exact way I often hear that question be asked. Why do we lack critical thinking? Why? And also shameless plug. My mother wrote a book on decolonizing the mind, and it's through her writing the book and me being her son and me being present, I realized what you said there. We don't even begin to understand the webs in the kinks within the mind of the African, right?
Yes.
And then that also reflects in how Africa still worships Western powers, and Western powers capitalize off that, like you said, that foundation in which was set that we live today. Sir.
Yes.
Sir. Then that goes to my next question.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, that was so good. I just need a second to breathe because that was so good.
Thank you.
Sir, at your age, you're a young man. You're 28. You're probably a year older than me. I'm 29. I'm 28. You're 29. But anyway, as a young man of your generation, you're probably in the generation of our parents. You probably could be the same age as my father, my mother. You know that is a very scarce perspective amongst us. You know that because I guess that is the generation where the indoctrination truly happened. The same way when you communicate with, even here I'm communicating with Westerners, Europeans, at that age, it's hopeless. To think that it's hopeless. It's at that point they have set in their minds that the African, some way his incompetence is the reason he is in the place which he is today. And there's nothing we can do. In fact, we've done all we can. We've given to charities. We send people out there all the time, and still they waste the money away. And that's why I told you about some loved ones I had would tell me, drop this nonsense. It's because the African is stupid. How did you arrive here, sir? Being in the midst of your generation, it's not often a man of your generation can come to this level of understanding.
Well, one of the things that I'm going to seize on before I answer your question is one of the things that the African has to decolonize is time, because the African has to look very critically, again, deploy critical thinking to completely decolonize their notion of time. Now, the exactness of time is a Western construct. If you talk to your parents or your grandparents, you'll realize that when they were kids, there were age sets as opposed to specificity in the issue of years. The Gregorian calendar that the entire world subscribes to today, including Africa, is a Western concept. Now, the dangers of that is that nowadays, somebody like yourself, when you're about to clock 30, if you're a lady especially, there's always undue pressure on you that you must have ticked certain boxes. And even a man, you still must have ticked certain boxes. So the reason you're in that state is because of that Gregorian calendar that has not worked much for the African in this day and age. So we have got to begin to decolonize time. We have got to begin to then realize that the beauty of age sets, as they used to be back then, was simply the fact that if, whichever number of people were born, say, in a given decade, are just in the same age set, and they are not under that pressure of the specificity that goes up to second, tick-tock, such that when that is happening and you're chained to that specificity of time, it's almost impossible to be present in the here and in the now, because you are constantly pressurized by that specificity. You have got to be in a meeting at 12:32, and if you're not in that meeting at 12:32, it becomes something that can spoil your entire week. You are 36 years old, you are 4 years shy of 40. Now, what that does at an even broader level, if I zero in on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there would be no Monday blues if we were not bound to the fact that Monday is after Sunday. Now, we have lost the fact that in reality, Harrison, all these days are the same. It's not like Monday is a different day in the grand scheme of things than Tuesday is. That's not how it is at all. All these days are pretty much the same. What is different is what we bring into these days. Now, to the extent that what we bring into the days is determined by the day of the week that it is, then you're very happy on Fridays and Saturdays, but you're very sad on Monday. You have Monday blues, you see. So we need to really, first of all, at an individual level, but as time goes by, even at a policy level, we need to decolonize the time, the Western notion of time that keeps us completely bound. Now, after saying that, let it pause, let it, just absorb that, because
Yeah. That was,
yeah.
it might take a few to come around on that one.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, after saying that, I would then say this. Thomas Sankara was 34 years old when he became president. Uh, when that unholy alliance of the corrupt ruling elite, in the case of Burkina Faso, led by Blaise Compaoré, but also in conjunction with France, in conjunction with the CIA, when they then took out Thomas Sankara, it was only 4 years after he became president, 1987, meaning that he was 38 years old when they took him out. Now, Thomas Sankara had decolonized not just his mind, but also his understanding of time. His relationship with time was not bound by the Western constructs of time. That is why, at the tender age of 34, he didn't look at himself as too young, that my time will come, let me just take it easy, then my time will come, because he was just a child of Africa who wanted to transform the continent, and his age was secondary to that reality and to that dream. His age did not inform what he could or couldn't do, because for too long, the youth of Africa, especially in the current generation, continue imagining or believing that at a certain point in future, again, back to the specificity of time, then they will be able to do ABCD. Meanwhile, the older generation in Africa, they are either living in the glory years of the 60s or 70s when things were cheap, or the 80s. But both of those generations are actually making fatal assumptions, and they're fundamentally flawed, because one generation is living in the glory of the past, the older generation. The younger generation is living in the glory of the future. Now, what happens to the present, Harrison? What happens to the present if both of these generations are not investing their collective energies, their complementary energies to the present? It is no wonder that the African then is reduced to merely hoping for a beautiful heaven one day, because the present is nothing to write home about. The past is gone. They can't go back to that. The future then coalesces in that heaven, that irrespective of one's religion, you live with that perennial hope that, okay, we are suffering now in Africa, but one day, one time, we will no longer be suffering. See, so that I'm totally not against religion in that sense. I myself I subscribe to Christianity, but the truth of the matter is that we cannot allow ourselves to live in a world, in a continent where our peace of mind is only in heaven.
Oh,
Our
that's not
joy
even biblical.
unspeakable, yeah, it's not. It's not. Our joy unspeakable is only in heaven, you see. So, uh, we've got to get that thing very, very clearly that the different generations in Africa today must radically change their relationship with time so that their respective ages stop being barriers that divide them from taking complementary action that brings on board the respective core competencies of these different generations.
Oh, my goodness. I'm just thinking about what you said there. Oh my, y'all gotta run this back a few times. Y'all gotta run this back. I'm thinking about that. Do you know that you said you're a Christian, right?
Yes.
So am I. I actually went to go listen to some, although I knew this in my spirit, I went to go listen to Miles Monroe preaching the other day. I was listening to back to an old sermon,
Yes.
and he said the exact same thing. He goes, that's where the Christians have got it terribly wrong, because Christ said, let it be on earth as it is in heaven. He said for us to bring that experience to have, he said, have dominion over the earth. And it's this toxic colonial Christianity that constantly points to, and my mom said this as well, and I think she put in her book of like all the songs they used to sing when they were under Rhodesia at the time, and they were under Rhodesia, Zimbabwe was Rhodesia, they constantly sang songs that said, oh, when we go, things will be better when we go. And she's looking back now and she says, why were all of our worship songs about when we die?
Yes.
Even in those times, we were singing songs that could only imagine about later. And now if a Christian stops you on the street, if a Nigerian woman stops you on the street, I remember my friend was just telling me recently, a Nigerian woman stopped him on the street and said to him, do you know where you're going to go when you die? What is this fear? And it's a spirit. So there's so many things that have infiltrated it. Spirit of fear. We're not supposed to have a spirit of fear. This... Goodness me, sir. The concept of
absolutely.
Come on, sir. Come on.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is so important. And Harrison, linked to that concept of time, is also this issue of Western style democracy, because Western style democracy then told Africa, in sync with the specificity of time in the Western world, that, okay, guys, there's something magical called a ballot box. Now, this magical ballot box, every 4 or 5 years, you can drop in there pieces of paper and it will magically give you exemplary transformative leaders. Wow. These leaders will then bring a huge difference into your countries. Now, the evidence on the ground here in Africa suggests, I dare say very convincingly, that we now realize that that ballot box is not magical. It's not magical by any measure. Yes, it is fairly orderly, but you have to look long and hard. You have to really, 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 really look long and hard, Harrison, to find an African leader who was elected through the ballot box that is transformative, that history has been kind to him or her, whether in the past or even the present. You can count them on one hand, the African leaders who were very transformative, who were products of the ballot box. Now, why did I link that to the Western construct of time? Because we are told to somehow just pick some couple of years, whether it is 4 years or 5 years, and it does not matter if you're going to suffer a lot in between these electoral cycles. It does not matter if these leaders will rip you off, if they'll adhere to the big man syndrome and enrich themselves at the expense of the people. It does not matter. What matters more so to the West is that they are products of the ballot box. Meanwhile, if you go to China, that Western concept of governance is not in existence at all, at all. The evidence suggests, I dare say convincingly again, that it is not accidental that China is now the second strongest economy globally. If you go to the Gulf states, if let's say the United Arab Emirates, again, the ballot box doesn't exist there. Now, I'm not saying that Africa should go that direction, but the same way we have got to decolonize our minds, as we decolonize our minds, we're also going to decolonize the governance systems in Africa so that we end up with Afrocentric governance systems that respect the will of the masses, but at the same time are not just copy and paste of Western style democracy, because it doesn't help when a president has to come along every 5 years and focus on building their own respective legacies. That's an African, it is an African completely. If you look at a country like Switzerland, you're based in Europe and they have a collective system of presidency that is rotational. Every year, you have a new president from this collective. And Switzerland is doing just fine. I have not had anybody issue sanctions against them. That why do they have this singular year rotational presidency? But what that has done to Switzerland is that it has completely obliterated political messiahs. Nobody can claim in Switzerland that they have singularly brought change to that country. It has placed emphasis on the collective. Now, if you're looking at Africa, Ubuntu, the African philosophy, is itself founded on the concept of collectivism. It's founded on that notion that I am because we are, and we are because I am. Now, if that is essentially a philosophy that is as African as it gets, why haven't we infused it into our governance systems? Can we have a hybrid solution that, yes, maybe maintains the ballot box, but at the same time builds on the ballot box? Can we actually think outside the box, pun intended? Can we do that? Can we think outside the ballot box and have another layer to that particular governance? Can we strengthen our accountability mechanisms so that it's not like the only way you can hold Kenya's President Ruto or Nigeria's President Tinubu or Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa or South Africa's President Ramaphosa? It shouldn't be the case that the only way they can be held accountable is every 5 years or every 4 years when they're either being re-elected or kicked out of office, Can we have a better accountability mechanism in between those electoral cycles? That is if we insist on going that direction. Now, that again is critical thinking. And in this scenario, we are then linking this specificity, this obsession with specificity that the West has that is incalculated in the West's very notion of time. Is it possible to free ourselves from that kind of arrangement and come up with our own governance systems that are more respectful of seasons, for example? Yeah.
What you just said there reminded me of a conversation I had with an African brother, and he just moved to the UK. So I love he's not colonized, and nor is he holding the European culture up to this, holier than thou, thing, which I'm very surprised. A lot of time when brothers and sisters immigrate to the country, to them it's heaven slightly,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you just touched on the concept of our wisdom and our knowledge. I think it's Ubuntu culture.
Yes.
Our cultural knowledge and wisdom being frowned upon because we're now viewing everything through colonial eyes. And
Yes.
he said something that was so powerful. He goes, his grandmother told him that back in the day, they didn't have jail. as you would say. They had a thing where they would say, if you killed, let's say you killed, and one man killed another man, they would have you go and live with that man's family who you killed. He's Congolese, by the way. So you would live with his mother, maybe live with his child, live with that family in that place, and have to live with the guilt of taking away. I just thought this was genius. I don't know how, his grandmother told him that was the case, so I'm sure that happened. But these concepts of that, what we see is reform, right? That's reform. That's prison reform, where you throw someone in a cell and they're just further deteriorating or even becoming worse because now they're around like-minded people, and many of them become reoffenders. So we had very wise things, even when we think about, I'm currently now going through the marital stages, as I'm marrying my fiancée, and we have so much cultural customs where you can see this. It's so well thought out. We are such a well thought out people, but because we're looking everything through the lens of Western thing, we say, nah, that doesn't look like what Western did, throw that out. That doesn't look like what the Western did, throw that out. And then we can't even now govern ourselves off of cultural customs and wisdoms that we had as a very intelligent people. Like you said, back to your first point, because we're even the fact that we're not critical thinkers, our critical thinking is suppressed under a colonial mind. Oh, sir.
Exactly. Yes.
Sir.
Yes,
Sir,
exactly.
can I just please ask you, because I know this is going to open a can of worms, but I really, really got to know, and I know there's going to be a few pals who want to know this as well, and I know there's a lot of us Christians, and thank you for actually coming out and saying that you are a Christian, because in this hour, it is so difficult to be a Christian, because with all the wisdom you have and knowledge you have on what happened and how Christianity was perverted and used, us people who have had a true conviction and a relationship with God and a moment with God, moments, are saying, how do I marry my newfound wisdom and the fact that I know I felt God in my life and felt Christ in my life? How have you maneuvered that understanding?
Yes. Great question, and very, very important one, because spirituality really is at the heart of humanity. And the moment humanity begins to lose spirituality, humanity starts to go haywire. You end up with Hiroshimas and Nagasaki's of this world. Now, in my case, it became about understanding that, number one, you cannot put God in a white box or a black box for that matter. God is not exclusive to your understanding of God. And anytime we make that mistake of limiting God to our understanding of God, then we do ourselves a great, great disservice, because in essence, we're making ourselves like small gods, who are now determining how God should look like to us or should behave to us, or to other people for that matter. Now, what I can add to that is it was a very personal, intimate realization that is at the very heart of my strong belief in Pan-Africanism and in the African dream as something that can be realized in the here and in the now. Now, the danger at a very practical level, decolonizing is as godly as it gets, because when your mind is colonized and you make that fatal assumption that, for example, bread is better than cassava because bread is an imported meal, so to speak, then you are saying that the God who created cassava didn't do a very good job, that it's the God who created wheat who did a great job. When you're saying that Igbo or Shona or Swahili or Zulu are inferior to English and French, and German, then you're also saying that through the God who created these languages, or who allowed the multiplicity of languages to ensue globally,
Mm-hmm.
uh, didn't do a very good job. That the God
Mm-hmm.
who allowed English and French to become dominant languages is the one who did a better job. So what I'm trying to explain is that anytime we look down on what is African or what is within us, uh, that's not godly at all, because we are essentially saying that
Mm-hmm.
the colonized form of Christianity
Mm-hmm.
that taught us that some things are uncivilized or some foods
Mm-hmm.
are
Mm-hmm.
uncivilized uh, is more supreme than God the Creator, than God the
Mm-hmm.
Heavenly Father, which is not the case at all. So it's so important to find that fusion, that it's not even a middle ground, to find that essence that is looking at the why much more than the what. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you're focusing much more on the what, then it becomes ritualistic. That every Sunday when you do go to church,
Mm-hmm.
uh, then that's God's day. That's a special holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so what about Monday? Is in Monday God's day too?
Mm.
Uh, is in Monday also a special day? So you'll find that a lot of these things that are in our colonized minds, including from a religious angle, are not godly at all. They are not
At
spiritual at all.
all.
Yeah. In fact, they hinder and they hamper our spirituality. Yeah.
You know, another dear loved one of mine, and obviously, you're very familiar with this. When conversations get, with loved ones, what I mean, who share
Yes.
different opinions. One of them being a very, a staunch Christian, um, is under the impression that, to some degree, I'll say, and I'm actually not being on point as much because they're not really like this, but I'm just being a little bit more open because there are some people who are also more like this than this person anyway. And they're
Yes.
like,
Yes.
listen, I think one of the things I like to do is even to decolonize Christ being a white man. I think
Yes.
when we start there, it reminds us. I always make a joke and I say, if Africans found out that Christ was an African like yourself, if he showed up today and he looked like
Yes.
you, right? A lot of them would say, "Okay,
Yes.
I'm gonna go become a Muslim." They wouldn't. They'd
Yes.
even lose that value. I think even the feeling of it being a premium, God and premium religion comes from the concept in their mind that it's something that is above their race. But they
Yes.
look down so much on themselves that if they were to think of
Yes.
King David as an African man like yourself in image like
Yes.
that, it would actually discourage
Mhm.
them from thinking this was really the guy who I admired so much when I read Psalms. And I
Yes.
think some people say, oh, let's not think about that. It doesn't matter what color it is. But I actually think that there is an exodus in actually saying, you know what?
Mhm.
Christ probably was a black man. These were probably black men given the time and space. Africa at that
Yes.
time, it wasn't the Middle East, that was Africa, right? And I think when we
Yes.
begin to actually touch that very vulnerable nerve, is then when it begins to open up and say, okay, why do I now see Moses as a white hair and white beard? And does that support my belief system? Right? And
Yes.
and and,
Yes.
and what does that say about my view on myself if I don't? So what is your thoughts on even the fact of true Christianity is actually
Mhm.
not thinking about these topics and just seeing everybody the same and not touching on racism at all, or
Mhm.
unfortunately there's no better word to use than racism,
Yes.
internalized racism.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, great question again. And again, let me reiterate that it's so important for us to have such spiritual conversations
Yeah.
in such a spirit of openness and humility,
Mm-hmm.
because all too often they are had in a very combative nature that
Mm.
seeks to prove who is right and who is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it's also a very intimate, personal thing. Now, the direct answer to your question would be, indeed, it is true that when your mind is colonized, it then colors your spirit. And then that informs all the experiences, all the conclusions that you reach in your life are already tainted and polluted by the fact that your mind is colonized, that your spirit is already affected by that, uh, which is why it was possible for the missionaries to work alongside the colonialists back in the day, because they had the white supremacy controlling them, even though they were using different tools to perpetuate, that white supremacy. Uh, and unfortunately, that became a foundation that still has reverberations even in today's Africa, because, for example, back to the food thing, because I strongly believe that Africa must decolonize its cuisine. Africa must decolonize its food systems.
Wow.
Sugar, Harrison, history, anybody can research and they'll find this to be true, that a lot of the missionaries were the same ones who then introduced sugar, to Africa as something that was good food for the people. Uh, we now know that sugar has led to untold problems across the continent and in the world. The same people who told us to start consuming sugar are now moving away from sugar. So, yeah. So to the extent that Christian missionaries played a role in that, uh, this is just a concrete example of some of the seeds that were planted back then that had nothing to do with spirituality, but had everything to do with white supremacy, which says that anything white is better, including white names. Uh, I totally understand, you can have 2 or 3 African names and no Western name, but still be as evil as it gets. And you can have one Western name and one African name, as is the case with many Africans, and still be a great person. So the point I'm making about names is only the fact that the Africans were told that even your name is not enough. It's not enough. You must get another name to be a complete human, and that shows the extent of the damage that was then done. Because a lot of times when they were told that, they would then get the new English name at baptism, Christian baptism. Yeah, you're baptized, and then voila, now you're David
Is this
Kwame.
not idolatry? Is this not the Israelites worshiping the calf when Moses went upstairs to go and talk to God at the
Absolutely.
mountain, and he came back down and he found they had made a calf, a golden calf? Is that not what we're addressing?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that one. And you see, if that message comes out like you've said it, like you've rightly said it, then we begin to then decolonize even Christianity, so to speak, so that we stop inherently assuming that the current assumptions that people have that Jesus was white, that Christianity in itself is white because the Vatican is in Rome. If it's about the Anglican Church, the headquarters are in the UK, you know. Uh, so all these things, all this goodness is stemming not from God, but from the whites, who introduced it to us. So we've got to point out this in such a light so that people begin to understand that the African is not any lesser. Because sadly, a lot of Africans, even psychologically deep in their psyche, associate excellence, whether spiritual excellence or material excellence, with the West. And sometimes it's easy to blame the victim But as we said at the beginning, the reason they are associating material wealth, for example, with the West is because at home they have known nothing but poverty, poverty that has been largely perpetrated by that unfair and exploitative global economic order. And then now when you come to church, same story. You go to church on Sunday, you're looking up and you're seeing the white Jesus there.
Mm.
So of course you'll grow up thinking that you're less. You'll
Mm-hmm.
grow up thinking that you're less, not just at an individual level, but at a racial level. Now, if you make it to university and you're finding that even in philosophy, you're only studying about Aristotle and Nietzsche, and no black person there in the two names that I've mentioned. Yet we have a lot of African philosophers that are just not in our educational system,
Thank you.
you see, which is why, again, we have to decolonize our education system, you see. So these things, both from the religious angle, educational angle, culinary angle, political angle, they are all converging to tell the African that you are less, you are not enough. That is why you had to import a form of governance through the Western style
Mm.
democracy. You had to import the food you'll be eating every morning when they brought you things like sugar, you know. Uh, and if you live your entire life with that belief system, of course, you pass it on to your children, who then pass it on to their children. So we have a monumental task to undertake that holistic and radical decolonization, but it's already happening. Thankfully, through people like yourself, all the Africans who are now in their 20s uh, must realize that they have to be the generation that retraces their steps and brings that,
Retraces the
yeah,
steps, uncle.
exactly. That has to happen because when you retrace your steps, you are going to recapture the good that has been lost, even at the same time as you embrace the good that has been gained. Yeah.
Even Christ, I think he said, take these stones and I want you to place these stones here. I think I'm not sure when they crossed the River Jordan and said, you'll
Yes.
remember. I want you to remember what they had to walk. God has always been a God of, can we remember these steps here? Because I don't want you to move past this later on. And you will remember and you will do Passover and you will have this remembrance for the good and for the
Yes.
bad. Where it went wrong.
Exactly.
Oh my good. Thank you so much for
Exactly.
answering that question.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And oh look, let's get to your book now because
Yes.
I'm really enjoying this. Your book,
Oh,
Savannah Footprints.
yes.
Is there something you want to say there?
Yeah, something quick I wanted to add because
Please, yes, please, please,
yeah,
please, please.
it has been used to divide Africans. Uh, the Muslims who are watching this at this particular moment, because nearly half of Africans are
There we
Muslims.
go. Yes, let's talk about
Yeah,
this.
yeah, it is very, very important for people who are truly spiritual to appreciate the fact that the best you can do is to live your life to the best of your ability
Mm-hmm.
and to have the humility to embrace your spirituality
Mm-hmm.
uh, while not making that blanket declaration that every other person away from your belief system is hellbound, it's
Wow.
completely hellbound. Yeah, it's so critical for that to happen because we cannot also, as Africans, then allow the fact that I am a Christian and you're a Muslim, or I am a Muslim and you're a Christian, to then viscerally and fundamentally divide us. So much so that uh, you, as a Christian, you associate more with the United States of America. Me, as a Muslim, I associate much more with the Gulf states. You
Wow.
know,
Wow.
yeah, that cannot happen. It cannot happen. As I said a little bit earlier, it is not godly when you assume, when you place God in a box. My humble view is that that speaks to your pride because you're actually telling God that I know better than you. So the Christians may have a lot of unanswered questions about Muslims, and the Muslims may have a lot of unanswered questions about Christians, but they shouldn't use those difficult unanswered questions as a reason to divide them, as a reason to behave in a manner that suggests that they are superior, because that would be exactly the same like the white supremacist approach that ended up colonizing Christianity and messing up generations of people who, the more religious they became, the less African they were essentially within them.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's not acceptable. Like you eloquently put it, and I totally agree. That's also not godly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very
that's what I
much
wanted
needed to
to add
put
in
that
that.
in there. Very,
Yeah.
very much needed. And I really needed that, unlike a conversation I was having with the Holy Spirit earlier today. So he really heard me and he's answered it right there. So thank you so much for that. I really needed it. And you guys are going to enjoy that one.
Thank
Look,
you. Yes.
your book,
The book.
Savannah Footprints, draws wisdom from historic African leaders. What inspired you to write it? And what lessons can today's leaders draw from the past?
Yeah. Wow. That is a really, really great question. Uh, I have to say that you ask deep, important, and critical questions. Don't take it for granted. A lot of people don't ask the right questions. They just ask good questions. So keep building on that, because the more we ask the right questions like the ones you're asking, the more we're able to dive even deeper into the truth that will set us free. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. So over the course of the last 10 or so years.
Wow. What an amazing conversation. But first, before we go, we just want to thank each of you, our PAL community, for continuously following us and growing with us on this transformative journey. We want to make sure that you comment below and follow us at Pan-African Lifestyle. And please, remember, don't just live any dream, live the African dream. Thank you so much for watching. I've been your host, Harrison Paul, and until next time.
Living a dream, living the African dream.